Hi, my name's David. Today I'm going to show you how to change the oil and filter in a 2019 Subaru Impreza. It's a very simple job, and we'll start out here by showing you the tools and the supplies that you need. First thing you should do is get a little bit familiar with your maintenance manual. On ours, on page 28, it shows you that you should change your oil every 6 months or every 6,000 miles, whichever comes first. So in my case, because we don't drive this car real frequently, I usually change it on 6-month intervals. The next thing you want to do is check your owner's manual, and it looks like this. And on page 11.8, it will show you how to check the oil level, checking the oil level, and on page 11.9, it'll show you how to read the dipstick. And it tells you, for example, this is useful information, the 2 marks on your dipstick represent 1.1 quarts. So depending upon if your oil is ever low, depending upon whether it's all the way down to the bottom mark or halfway, you can estimate how much oil needs to be added. And over here, they show you where the dipstick's located, number 1. And then they show you where the oil filter is located, that's item 3. And then item 2 is the filler cap. And you also want to look in the back here, this is page 12.5. They explain to you that you want to use 0W20 synthetic oil, and they also explain that when you're changing the oil in the filter that you'll use approximately 4.7 quarts. So that brings us to the next thing. You'll need 5 quarts of 0W20 synthetic motor oil. I buy mine at Costco, buy a case of it, and you'll use, as I said, you'll use 4.7 quarts, so you need to have at least 5 quarts of this available. Okay, the other thing you'll need is you'll need to have a wrench for taking off the drain plug. It's a 14 millimeter drain plug, so if you have a 14 millimeter socket and a ratchet, that's the best way to remove it. If you don't have that, then a box end 14 millimeter wrench is also an excellent choice. And if you don't have either of those, but you have an adjustable wrench, that can work, but that's not ideal. It's better to have either a socket or a box end wrench. And you want to have some rags, and I have some cardboard that I put underneath the car just in case you drip anything. And it's also good to have some rubber gloves. And you also need a drain pan. So I've got a plastic drain pan, and then you'll need something to transport it to a place to dispose of it. I pour it into this tank here, and actually, now that I think of it, I pour it into a gallon container. And our local hazardous waste, when they are recycling, they'll pick it up on the curbside. So if you have a gallon container, just use that. Use a funnel to pour it into that. Dispose of it properly. Don't dump it down the sewer. That's not a good choice. Anyway, we'll get started here. I nearly forgot, you'll also need an oil filter. So I buy a case of these from Subaru. This is the part number right here. You can buy aftermarket suppliers, but I always feel it better using the manufacturers. So get this part, and you also want to have some of the crush washers that you'll use on the drain plug after you've replaced them. A lot of people don't bother replacing this, but if you want to do this right, you'll replace this, and here's the part number for that. Also, don't worry if your car is slightly different model or year. A lot of what I'm showing you works for similar year models. I had a 2014 and it had a 15 millimeter drain plug instead of the 14 millimeter that the 2019 has. So the only thing, you know, that's a little minor difference like that is the only thing you'll notice. The general job is identical whether you're doing a 2019, 2018, or you know, some other year that's close. So we'll get started here. It's also handy if you happen to have a floor jack, because you'll need to slightly jack up the right side of the car. I bought this at Costco years ago. You can buy them in any auto parts store. It's not mandatory, but it just gives you a real quick, easy, safe way to just slightly jack up the right side of the car to give you a little more space to crawl under it. Okay, before we get started, I'll give you a quick orientation about your engine and the oil related things. Over here is the dipstick, and over here we've got the oil filter, and over here we've got the oil filler spout. And if you forget what weight oil, it's right on here, so just take a look. It says 0W20. And I'll also mention that having this oil filter in the engine bay is a huge convenience. On most cars it's underneath the engine, you've got to crawl underneath and futz with it, but it's a real convenience the way they've located up here in the engine bay. So we'll get started here. First thing you need to do is run your engine for about 5 minutes. I question whether that's really necessary, but all the instructions on changing your oil always tells you to do that, so I just did it, ran it for 5 minutes. The other thing I've done is over here on the right side of the car, I've jacked it up just, I don't know, 6 inches or so, just so that that wheel's still kissing the ground. This is just going to make it a little bit easier to crawl underneath the car, because it's a fairly low car, and this will make it easier. If you don't have a floor jack, you can use the jack that's in the back of the car with a spare tire or any other type of jack you've got. Take a look at your manual and we'll tell you where you need to set the jack underneath there. There's a place just for it. And the other thing I've done is I've got some pieces of cardboard that I will set down underneath the car in case I spill any oil. I'll keep my garage floor clean. And I've got a work light down there, and we'll get the oil pan ready, the oil drain pan ready, and our wrench, and we'll go undo that drain plug and drain the oil out. That's step one. Before you do that, it's a good idea to just loosen this filler neck a little bit. It makes the oil flow out a little more quickly if you do that. So, okay, we'll get started here. Okay, this is my drain pan. We'll just scoot it underneath where the drain plug is and catch that oil. And the oil will gush over to the left side of the car. So just be sure and have this drain pan ready to catch it, because the oil will gush to the left side of the car when you take that drain plug out. Okay, I'm underneath the car now, and sort of in the center there's this oval cutout right here. And if you look up there, you can see the drain plug. It's right there. So just get your wrench out on that drain plug, get your catch pan positioned over to the left side of the car so that you can catch that oil, because it does gush out towards the left. This is what the drain plug looks like. We're going to take off that washer. It's called a crush washer because it's soft and it compresses. We're going to take that off and put on the new one. And then before you reinstall this, take a clean rag and wipe off around the opening in the engine oil pan where you remove this, so that you have a nice clean surface when you screw this back in. Here's our new crush washer. We'll take it out of this package and we'll just slip it on that drain plug. If you compare the old washer on the right with the new one, you can see how they actually do compress. That's why they call it a crush washer. It makes for a tighter seal. Okay, we've got the oil emptied in the drain pan. I took a rag and I cleaned all around the drain plug before I put the new plug in, or the new the plug, the drain plug, in the new washer. The trick on that washer is when you're tightening it, you'll feel it compressing, and it will, after a few turns, after it's made contact, it'll stop compressing because it's been compressed all the way, and you'll feel it get tighter. So and then just go a little bit farther than that, but just tighten it and notice that crush washer is compressing, and you'll feel when it stopped compressing, because it'll get much harder to turn. And just go, you know, 1/8 of a turn past that. Make sure it's good and tight. Okay, that's the only difficult part of this job, and it's not that difficult. Oh, and one last thing: take a rag and that plastic rock shield underneath the engine. Wipe all around that opening where the drain plug is, because sometimes some oil gets on that plastic rock shield, and it'll drip on your driveway or your garage floor. So take a rag and clean all around that plastic rock shield, or whatever you want to call it, that has that opening for the drain plug in it. And okay, now we're on to the easy part. We'll get on to the next step here. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is remove the oil filter, and as you remember, that's this blue thing here that you access from the engine bay. And it's helpful to have a oil filter removal tool. There are different types. This type I've had pretty good luck with. You just attach a 3/8 inch ratchet to it. And the other type I've had good luck with is this type here. It's adjustable for different size oil filters. So pick up one of these, and it'll make it much easier to remove that oil filter. Okay, this is how this works. It makes it real easy to unscrew it, and the other type works well too. So just get one of these, one or the other, and give it a go, and you'll take this off real easily. When you've unscrewed it, it just comes right off. Couldn't be easier. And I'll show you how to put on the new one here in a second. That's what it looks like where it was attached. This is the new filter, and before you screw it on, this O-ring here, this black rubber O-ring, you want to dip your finger in that oil there and just run it around this O-ring here just to lubricate it, so that'll make it seat better when you screw it back on. Okay, we've cleaned that off. You just have to clean off this surface here where that O-ring seats. And then just take the new one and screw it on. And again, I'll explain to you how you tighten it. The filter explains right on it that you need to do what I already told you to do, which is apply a film of oil to the gasket, to the O-ring. And then they explain, after it makes contact, when you screw down, turn it 7/8 of a turn more after it makes contact. Or if you have a torque wrench, you can torque it to 10 to 14 Nms. Okay, we'll get this on here. Okay, I've just screwed it down so it just makes contact. And all you need to do now is make a note. You can put a pencil mark on this, or you can just note how it says engine on it. Just turn it roughly 7/8 of a turn farther to tightly seat it. Okay, after you've got your filter on snugly, then just remove the filler cap, set it aside, and we will put in the oil. I forgot to mention earlier that another helpful thing, it's not necessary, but it's nice to have a funnel to put in this filler spout here. It just makes it easier not to spill any as you're pouring it in. So I'm going to pour in 4 full quarts, and then we'll measure out 7/10 of a quart for the final 0.7 of a quart. Okay, we'll just pour that oil in. Pour in 4 full quarts, and then we'll measure that last 7/10 of a quart. Okay, there are 946 milliliters in a quart, So 0.7 would be 662 milliliters. So what I've done is I've bought at the local hardware store a measuring cup, and I'm going to measure out 662 approximately milliliters, and we'll pour that in, and that'll be your 7/10 of a quart. So you will have put in 4.7 quarts, which is the proper amount when you're replacing all the oil and the oil filter, because the oil filter holds, of course, some oil. So we'll get this in. Okay, this is 500 milliliters. We'll pour this in, and then we'll put in the final 162 to give you 662 milliliters, the 7/10 of a quart. Okay, here are the remaining 162 milliliters to give you 662, this plus the 500, and then you'll be done filling the crankcase. Before you reinstall the filler cap, just take a clean rag and wipe off this rubber gasket, and then wipe off where that gasket seats there. You do not need to oil this gasket like you did on the filter. And then screw on the filler cap snugly, and next step is to properly dispose of this oil. And where I live in Seattle, you can put this in a gallon container and put it out with your recycling. So depending upon where you live and so forth, properly dispose of it. In Seattle, as I said, we can just put it in a gallon container with our name and address on it and put it out with our recycling. They'll pick it up. So find out how to properly dispose of it in your area and do so. Okay, we've added all the oil. We've put on the filler cap. I've lowered the car, removed the jack, and now what you should do is start the engine, let it run for a few minutes, shut it down, wait a few minutes, and then check your oil over here and make sure that it looks like it's at the proper level. I've never had it not be at the proper level, but if it's too low, then add a little bit. The distance between those two marks in the dipstick is 1.1 quarts. That might help you estimate a little bit how much it's down. But in all likelihood, it's going to be right about where it should be. But run it for a few minutes, shut it off, wait a few minutes to let the oil drain down to the bottom of the crankcase, and then check your oil level and make sure it's safe, that it's proper. So you're done. It's a pretty easy job. Probably takes 45 minutes or so. And if you're like me, there's some satisfaction in doing this yourself. Of course, you could take it to a quick lube place, but I always kind of like working on these things myself. So have fun and good luck. One last thing. After you've shut it down, after you let it run a few minutes, get on your knees and look underneath the car and make sure there's no oil. My brother-in-law once changed his oil and he forgot to put in the drain plug. So you don't want to make that mistake. But do look underneath the car and make sure you don't see any big puddles of oil. Good luck. Okay, this is how you check your oil level. You pull out the dipstick, dry it off with a rag, and these two dimples on the dipstick are the high and the low. You want it to be near the high one. I just checked mine. So after you pull it out, dry it with a rag, and then stick it back down in the tube right here, and then pull it out and then see where the oil is between these two dimples. It should be by that upper one. I just checked mine and it was just fine. Last thing I do is in my maintenance book, I put the date and the mileage that I did this, and then somehow remind yourself, depending upon how much you drive. I do mine every 6 months because I don't drive it that much, but you need to change the oil every what is it, 12,000 miles? 6,000 miles. Yeah, 6,000 miles or 6 months, whichever comes first. So figure out a way to remind yourself when it needs to be done. One last thing, one last thought for you. If you don't drive your car very much, it's tempting to say, oh, I'll just wait, and even if it's 9, 12 months, I'll just wait for 6,000 miles to roll around. But that's a mistake, because acids build up in the oil from the combustion process, and those acids can eat away at bearings and metal surfaces in your engine. So stick to, as they say, 6,000 miles or 6 months, whichever comes around first. You'll be doing your engine a favor. So have fun. Good luck. Goodbye.